Alrighty guys, welcome back. This time we're going to be talking about functions. So let's start off with the first function you ever write, the main function. So breaking it down into its parts, this very first part right here, these three letters, as we discussed before, stand for integer, and that's a type. And in the case of a function, that is the return type when it's out in front of it like this. So we have the return type of for the function that is named main, and so that means unless there's an exception, this function will return an integer to whatever has called it. In this case, the operating system. Now you'll notice after the name of the function, we have a parenthesis, the open parentheses. Now, these open and closed parentheses are containing our variables or parameters that get sent into, that we are sending into the function. They are required unless they are what's called initialized. So for instance, this integer we could set equal to 0. And that would initialize it, and that would make it to where by default that integer would be 0. The problem is that if this first one is set to default and this second one is not, you run into issues, so watch out for that. Anyways, so what happens is you can pass in variables or we've talked about variables last time. The parameter variables are actually so that you can send information into your function to work on. So in this case, we're getting the arg or argument count, or argc. So it's an integer that contains the count of arg variables, which is this argv. And so it's giving us the count so that we know how many objects are in this array that we're getting right here. And we haven't talked about arrays yet, but we will. Basically, it's a list of things instead of just one thing, if that makes any sense. So if this was an int here, it would be a list of integers. In this case, it's a list of char stars or strings. So for instance, what we can do, and we haven't talked about for loops yet, but we can make a for loop that creates an integer that's initialized to 0, and as long as it is that integer is less than our count, we will up the count after each go through, and we will go through and we will print out each of our argv's for that using this integer, because we're using this integer as the place in the list, and then we'll inline. So this is just showing you that we're using this this variable that we get in, this parameter that we get in, to know when to stop our for loop, and then we're using our iterator through the for loop to access this other variable, which happens to be an array, i.e. a list, kind of. List is a data structure, and so that's why I say sort of, because it is an array. It is, you can think of it like a list. That's what I'm getting at. So anyways, so we'll go through there. We'll go ahead and compile this and run it, and you'll notice that what it'll print, well, it printed nothing there, but if we add variables to the end of it, didn't print anything there either. What's going on? There it goes. Um, not entirely positive why that didn't work correctly the first time. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. I don't know what happened. Anyways, so you'll notice the first thing we get is our arg count, which is 3. Now, that might sound a little weird because, well, we're calling the program and then we're adding 2 things into it. But, well, to the args, the name of the program itself is also an argument. For the operating system, the command that you call to begin with is the very first argument. So you'll notice in our I0, that very first iteration through our for loop, we get the command that we put in, which is just our program that we just wrote, and then we get the second one for the second iteration, or the 1th iteration, because arrays they're 0-based arrays in C++, so you always start with 0 when you're accessing things. Thus, why our I starts out as 0. And then for the second, or the tooth, if you will, so 0th, first, second, I guess you'd say. Anyways, so there's the parameters. Let's talk about making our own other functions, functions to do other things. So let's say we want to move this for loop out of the main function, and we'll just call it, we'll give it a type of void because we don't care about the return type from it. We'll call it print args, and we'll send it the argc and the argv. And what I'm doing up here is what's called the declaration. So, as with variables, functions have to be declared before they can be used. You can declare and define at the same time, but the way that the compiler actually reads this file, it reads it like you would a book, like you would a page. So if you try and call print args and you've declared it down here instead of at least declaring it up here, if you've defined it down here but not declared it up here, then it won't know what you're talking about and you'll get a compiler error. And I'll show you that in a second here, actually. So we'll just send in our argc and our argv, and we'll finish creating this down here. Paste that code in, and we don't have to put a return because we're not actually returning anything, and it'll automatically return once it hits the end of the code block. So let's show you the working example first. So let's run this again. We get the exact same output just like we would expect. Now if I comment this out and try and recompile, you notice that we get an unidentified, undeclared identifier for our when we try and call that program, and that's because we didn't declare it before we tried to use it, and the definition was down here, and thus the declaration. Because if you, we could also do all of this all at once, right? Yeah. And this will work as well. I'll show you that. So yeah, so whenever you're calling a function, you can also, let's also do another function. We'll do have it return an int. We'll call it add. And we'll just add a with b. And we'll just do the function definition here as well. And we'll just return a plus b. Now the plus sign works exactly how you would expect it to. It adds the contents of the a variable with the contents of the b variable. There's also minus and division, multiplication, and then there's also another, they're called operators, called modulus. And what that would do is say A was 10 and B was 4. It would divide the 4 into the 10, but it would give you the remainder instead of. So instead, well, both answers are 2. Let's say you put in A was 11 and B was 4. Instead of being 2, which would be how many times 4 would go into 11, it would be the remainder, which would be 3. So, but we're doing addition. So, plus, and we'll do auto num is equal to add, using that auto keyword like we talked about last time, and we'll say 10 plus 123. And then we'll say 10 plus 123 equals, quit hitting the wrong buttons, Matt. In line. Alright. Now this time I'm going to have to change this compiler so that we, these compiler options, so that we can actually compile C++ 11 code. Perfect. And ta-da! So, that's functions. Please feel free to, leave any comments, questions, or feedback below. Please like, subscribe, and again, just let me know if there's anything you're interested in, or if you have any questions. I will be continuing on this path of re-recording. Y'all have a good day.